People usually think being a tour guide is just about memorizing a few lines of history, telling some old anecdotes and smiling as you lead guests around. But when you're a tour guide in a ghost town in Arizona, the job stops being a job. It turns into something closer to a spiritual test, a trial where if you slip up for even 1 second, the price you pay could be your own life. And here there are 9 rules. Rules that every single person who's ever worked this place knows by heart, because if you forget even one of them, you won't ever make it back. That's the first thing I learned after my very first night in this dust-choked dead town. My name's Alex, 28 years old, a history major who never really found the right place after graduating. No museum or archive wanted to hire some half-bored, half-lazy guy like me. I drifted for a while, then eventually took the tour guide gig just to scrape by. Honestly, I didn't care about the history of this place at all when I started. I just thought it was another forgotten patch of land with rotten wood houses, dirt streets, and cold, empty mine shafts. But the paycheck covered rent and a few cheap beers, so I said yes without thinking too hard. The ghost town sits on the edge of Arizona, about a 3-hour drive out of the city, and the farther you go, the more the world feels like it's been erased. Desert stretching all the way to the horizon. The wind dry and searing, blowing red dust against my windshield until I could barely see. Power lines standing crooked along the road. Wires humming in the hot gusts. The whole drive felt like heading into a place cut off from everything alive. The manager of the tour company was an older man, maybe early 60s, sunburned skin, silver hair, eyes narrowed like he never stopped watching you. He handed me a thin, leather-bound notebook and told me to read it carefully before my first tour. I figured it was just standard stuff about no smoking, no littering, no breaking antiques. But when I flipped it open, I found page after page of faded handwriting. Just 9 rules written out. Short, strange, unsettling rules like, after 6 p.m. do not knock on any house door in town, and if you see someone waving at you from a window, never wave back, and if you hear the church bell toll at midnight, stay in bed and do not look out your window. Every line weirder than the last. And I'll admit I laughed out loud reading them. I thought, of course, this must be their way of adding some spooky flavor for tourists. A clever marketing trick to make a bunch of broken-down shacks feel creepy enough to pay for. Otherwise, who the hell would waste money coming here? But when the manager saw me laugh, his face hardened, his voice dropped, and he told me I didn't have to believe, but I did have to obey. Because if I broke the rules, nobody could save me. I just nodded along, chalking it up as another scare tactic to keep rookies in line, like campfire stories meant for kids. That first night they set me up in one of the staff cabins. Bare bones, a wooden bed, a single lamp, and a window looking right down the main street. From there I could see all the warped old houses lined up on both sides, their broken porches sagging under the pale silver light of the moon. They looked less like buildings and more like hunched shadows waiting for something. I cracked open a beer I'd brought, scrolled on my phone, half excited, half exhausted, not sure what tomorrow would bring. And at the time I didn't realize those scribbled words in the notebook might save my life. I didn't know that just a few hours later I'd come face to face with something that would change me forever. It's burned into my memory close to midnight. When the desert wind howled through the cracks of the cabin, rattling the thin walls, I heard a sound, faint at first, then sharper. 3 slow knocks on the door. I froze, because immediately my mind flashed back to that one line in the book. Never open the door when someone knocks at midnight. My first thought was it had to be a prank, some other staff messing with the new guy. But the knocks were too deliberate, too heavy, not rushed like a joke. I stepped toward the door, hand out, but I stopped myself, heart racing, and pressed my ear against the wood. On the other side there was nothing. No footsteps, no breath, just the whistle of wind across the desert and the pounding of my own pulse. After a minute I backed away, trying to laugh it off, telling myself I was letting the creepy rules get into my head. But deep down there was this pressure, a cold weight in my chest, like eyes watching me from the dark beyond the glass. And that, I would later understand, was only the beginning. The next morning came with a thin veil of desert light, orange bleeding into pale blue, the kind of sunrise that feels like fire creeping over the horizon, and the old cabin walls groaned as if they'd been waiting all night for it. I barely slept, my mind replaying those knocks at the door over and over. But by 7 I was already dressed, ready to meet the manager again and start whatever counted as training. The notebook with the 9 rules still sat on the small wooden table, its cover warped and its pages brittle. And though I wanted to leave it there, I slipped it into my backpack. Maybe as a joke, maybe as insurance, I wasn't sure. The main office wasn't really an office, more like a saloon half collapsed, but kept upright with too many nails. The manager sat behind a desk that looked stolen from a courthouse. Sipping bitter coffee from a tin cup, he nodded when he saw me and asked if I read the rules. I told him yes, though my voice cracked a little, and he looked straight through me as if weighing whether I was the type who listened or the type who didn't last. He didn't waste time on pleasantries, just told me today's group would be small. 4 tourists, city people looking for a thrill. He reminded me twice not to improvise and not to answer questions about certain buildings. I asked which ones, and he simply said, "You'll know when you feel it," and that answer left me colder than the dawn air. By 9 a.m., a dusty shuttle pulled up and the tourists spilled out. 2 college kids holding GoPros, a middle-aged couple dressed like they were going hiking, but clearly already sweating in the desert heat. They looked around unimpressed until their eyes caught the faded wooden church, the half-fallen bell tower, the black open mouth of the mine entrance carved into the hill. Then the energy shifted, their grins tightened, and I saw the reason people still came here. Because this place radiated something wrong even under full daylight, something that tugged at you in ways you couldn't laugh off. I introduced myself, kept my tone casual, cracked a few dry jokes about ghosts not giving refunds, and led them toward the main street, dust puffing around our boots with every step, the wind kicking the scent of rust and old wood. It felt like walking through the bones of something that didn't want us here. At first it was easy, pointing out the blacksmith shop, the saloon, the sheriff's office telling the sanitized versions of history, how the town grew fast in the 1880s and died even faster when the mine collapsed, how people left overnight, leaving furniture, clothes, even meals on tables, the kind of history that sells postcards. But as we moved deeper in, past the 3rd block, I noticed the manager's words echoing in my head. Don't answer questions about certain buildings. And right on cue, the college kids pointed at a leaning 2-story house with curtains still hanging like cobwebs, and asked who used to live there. My throat tightened because something about the place looked sharper, heavier, like the air pressed down harder around it. I wanted to shrug it off, but instead I forced a smile and said that house wasn't part of the tour. One of them laughed and asked if it was haunted. I said, "Aren't they all?" and walked faster, praying they wouldn't push. Luckily, they didn't. The deeper we went, the stronger the silence got. The couple whispered to each other, their smiles fading. The college kids filmed every corner, but their voices dipped too, as if the place reached inside and squeezed out their energy. And though I pretended to stay calm, my eyes kept flicking to windows, broken doorways, cracks where shadows moved wrong, like they had shape without bodies. Twice I swore I saw someone step back from a window. Not reflections, not tricks, just there 1 second and gone the next. And each time I clenched the notebook through my backpack, the 9 rules like a pulse in my pocket. By midday, we circled back to the church, its wooden steps groaning as we climbed. The tourists asked if we could look inside, and I hesitated, because the notebook had a line that burned into me. Do not enter the church after noon unless the bell is rung. And it hadn't. Not once, not yet. So I told them the structure was too unstable, that it could collapse. They groaned but followed me out. And though they bought the excuse, I could feel their disappointment. And for a split second I almost let them in just to save face, but my gut twisted so hard I couldn't. And when I turned away, I thought I heard something faint, like a single chime carried on the desert wind, too light for anyone else to notice, but enough to make the hair on my neck stand on end. After the tour ended and the tourists climbed back into their shuttle, laughing louder now that they were leaving, the manager pulled me aside, his eyes sharper than before, and asked if I stuck to the rules. I nodded, told him about the church, and he studied me long enough that I almost squirmed. Then finally he clapped my shoulder once and said, "Good, you listened," in a tone that didn't feel like praise but relief, as if he'd been holding his breath until that moment. That night, alone again in my cabin, I replayed the day in my head, the way certain buildings felt heavier, the way shadows bent wrong, and that faint chime of the bell that maybe no one else heard. I sat with the notebook open, my finger tracing each of the 9 lines, wondering if they were written by some paranoid lunatic, or if they were the only reason anyone had survived here long enough to warn me. And as the desert wind picked up again, rattling the window frame, I thought about the knocks I'd heard the night before, and I knew this was only the beginning, that the 9 rules weren't suggestions. They were lifelines, and if I didn't cling to them, I'd never make it out. By the 3rd day, I started to feel like I was falling into a rhythm, Wake up with the desert sun burning through the thin curtains. Eat a stale granola bar. Splash water from the dented tin sink. Check the notebook with the 9 rules just to convince myself I hadn't forgotten them overnight. And then wait for the tourists to arrive. Most groups were the same. People who wanted a cheap thrill. Teenagers laughing too loud. Couples holding hands. Sometimes a family with kids who grew bored after 10 minutes. And every time I walked them down the dirt streets and pointed at the broken wooden signs, I told myself I was just a tour guide, nothing more. That the shadows slipping behind windows were tricks of the light, and that the silence pressing down on us was only the desert swallowing sound. But little by little I started noticing things that didn't fit into any logical box I could make. Things I couldn't just shake off. On the morning of my 3rd tour, I stepped out of my cabin and saw footprints in the dust. Small ones, barefoot, leading across the main street toward the mine entrance. The prints were sharp like they'd been made minutes earlier, but when I bent down, the dust was already dry and loose as if nothing had disturbed it. I followed them a few steps before they faded into nothing. My skin prickling because none of the tourists had arrived yet and no one on staff had feet that small. I told myself maybe coyotes, maybe wind patterns, but the excuse tasted like ash, thin and useless, so I shoved it down and waited for the shuttle. That day's group was only 2 men, brothers maybe, both wearing biker jackets, both acting tough, asking about ghosts like they wanted me to promise them one would show up. And the whole time they made cracks, kicking rocks, laughing too loud, trying to prove nothing scared them. And I stuck to the script, keeping them moving, avoiding certain houses, skipping over the church again when they asked about it. But when we passed the schoolhouse, one of them stopped cold, pointing at the broken doorway, saying he swore he saw someone standing inside. I glanced quick, heart spiking, but the room was empty. Just rotting desks and beams of light cutting through holes in the roof. Still, his face had gone pale, and the other guy teased him, but his laugh rang hollow. Later, as we looped back toward the mine, a gust of wind kicked up, rattling every loose board, carrying the faintest sound, a child's giggle, high and sharp. Threading between the buildings, I froze, my mouth dry. The 2 men stared at each other wide-eyed. Asking if I heard it, I wanted to deny it, but the sound was still in my ears. And all I could do was shove them forward, saying it was just wind whistling through old wood, but none of us believed it. That night, when I sat in my cabin with the lamp burning low, I opened the notebook again, reading line 5 over and over. If you hear a child laugh after sunset, do not acknowledge it. The words crawled across the page, burned into me because the giggle we heard hadn't been after sunset. It was in broad daylight, which meant either the rule didn't cover every possibility, or whatever haunted this place didn't care about sticking to schedules, and that thought left me colder than anything else. By the end of my 1st week, I started keeping notes of my own. Scribbles on loose paper, little maps of where I felt the air shift, where I caught glimpses of movement in windows, where tourists asked the wrong questions. And though I pretended it was research for better tours, I knew deep down it was survival. A desperate attempt to make sense of rules that weren't mine but now controlled every step I took. One evening after the tourists left, I decided to walk a little farther past the usual loop, down a side street where the houses leaned closer together like conspirators. The silence there felt thicker, my boots crunching too loud. And as I passed one doorway, I caught the smell of smoke. Not sharp like fire, but sweet, cloying like burning sage. I stepped closer, holding my breath, but the room was empty. Nothing but collapsed rafters and sand. Still, the smell clung to my nose, and I turned back fast, heart hammering, certain I'd crossed into a place I wasn't meant to. Back in my cabin, I wrote in my notes, "Smoke where nothing burns," and stared at it until the words blurred, because I couldn't tell anymore if I was documenting the town, or if the town was documenting me, pulling me deeper into its own story. The manager didn't say much those days, just kept watching, always asking if I followed the rules. And every time I said yes, though I wanted to ask what happened if I broke one, what exactly I was supposed to be afraid of. But some part of me knew asking was dangerous, that the less I said, the safer I was, so I kept my mouth shut and my eyes open, waiting because it was clear now the rules weren't warnings. They were traps disguised as lifelines, and the longer I stayed, the more I realized surviving here wasn't just about following them. It was about noticing the cracks between them, the gaps where something else slipped through. And though I told myself I was still a skeptic, still a man who only cared about rent and beer in the quiet hours, with the desert wind howling and the shadows pressed close, I couldn't escape the truth. This ghost town wasn't dead. It was watching, listening, and sooner or later, It would want more from me than obedience. By the second week, I could no longer tell if I was guiding tourists or if they were guiding me. Every group reacted differently. Some laughed at the emptiness, some grew uneasy and rushed me through the streets. But I started noticing the same pattern no matter who came. There was always a moment when their voices dropped, when the laughter died, when they glanced over their shoulders like they felt something behind them. I timed it once, and it always happened right around the same stretch of street. A block where the windows were all broken but the curtains still swayed as if someone moved behind them. I marked it on my crude map and stared at it each night, wondering if the rulebook had left things out on purpose. That's what ate at me most. Not the rules themselves, but the spaces between them. Because if the notebook was the only thing keeping me alive, then what about the dangers it didn't mention? What about the sounds, the smells, the glimpses that slipped outside those 9 lines? Were those loopholes or traps? One night after finishing a late tour, I stayed behind on the main street. The desert was cold, the wind sharp, the sky spilling stars across the black. I stood outside the church staring up at the crooked bell tower, the wood groaning under the weight of decades. The notebook said never enter after noon unless the bell rang, but it didn't say anything about standing outside, so I lingered, testing the edges, my breath clouding in front of me, waiting for something to happen. And after 10 minutes, I almost convinced myself it was fine. Just silence and shadows until I noticed the air grow still. Unnaturally still, the wind cutting off like a switch. And then I heard it, faint at first, then louder. The sound of footsteps on the church floorboards. Heavy, measured, like someone pacing inside. But when I stepped closer, pressing my ear against the door, there was nothing, no echo, just wood as cold as stone. And when I pulled back, the silence roared again, my body trembling as if the desert itself had exhaled. The next morning, I asked the manager, in a careful roundabout way, if the rules ever changed. He stared at me a long time before saying they never changed. Only the people who tried to change them. Then he turned away, leaving me with more questions and the uneasy sense that he wasn't warning me. He was daring me. That evening, I made a decision. Reckless or not, I wanted to test one. I wanted proof. Something my mind couldn't write off as tricks or nerves. So when the sun dipped low and the tourists left, I waited, sitting by the window of my cabin with the notebook open, eyes fixed on the main street. The rule about waving echoed in my skull. If you see someone waving at you from a window, never wave back. And for hours, nothing happened. Just dust swirling in the long stretch of dark houses. Until around midnight, I saw it. Faint movement on the second floor of the leaning house across the street. A figure standing in the window, shoulders stiff, arm lifting, hand moving side to side in the slow rhythm of a wave. At first, my chest tightened with fear. But as the seconds ticked by, I grew angry. Convinced it had to be one of the staff screwing with me. Some sick prank to keep the new guy scared. I almost raised my hand, almost gave a mocking little wave. But then something stopped me. Not reason, not fear, but instinct. A deep coil in my gut screaming no, so I kept my hands glued to my lap, heart hammering. And after a moment, the figure stilled, lowering its arm, retreating into the dark. Gone as suddenly as it had appeared, I sat frozen long after, sweat chilling my back despite the desert cold. And though I told myself it was nothing, just some coincidence, I knew in that moment I'd been close, dangerously close, to proving the rules weren't just warnings, they were boundaries, thin lines keeping something outside from stepping fully in. A few days later, another group came, this time a family, parents, and 2 kids. The kids restless, chasing each other, ignoring their parents' warnings. I kept them on the safer loop, pointing out landmarks, telling half-true stories. But halfway down the block, the little boy darted toward one of the houses, laughing, his hand reaching for the broken door frame. My stomach dropped because I recognized the house immediately. The same one where I'd seen the figure waving. I shouted, sharper than I meant to, and the boy froze, startled. His parents rushing to pull him back, their faces angry until they saw mine. Pale and trembling, I forced a laugh, blamed the structure for being unstable, but the truth burned inside me. If that boy had crossed the threshold, I don't know if we would have gotten him back. That night I couldn't sleep. The desert wind rattled the shutters, the lamp flickered, and I thought about how easily it could have gone wrong. How thin the line was between a safe tour and a tragedy. I wrote it all in my notes, every detail, and the more I wrote, the more I realized something had changed in me. I wasn't just a guide anymore. I was a prisoner of rules I didn't make. Rules I didn't believe in but had to obey. And the worst part was knowing I couldn't walk away. Because the notebook didn't say what happened if you quit. If you left the town, and some part of me feared the rules followed you, binding tighter the more you resisted. By the end of the week, I stopped laughing at the rules, stopped questioning them, and started counting them every night like prayers, whispering each one under my breath before sleep, as if saying them aloud might keep the knocks away, might keep the waving figures in their windows, might keep the child's laughter buried in the wind. But in the pit of my stomach, I knew it wouldn't last, because rules are meant to be broken. And here, breaking one wasn't an accident. It was an invitation, and sooner or later, something in this town was going to force me to make that mistake. By the third week, something shifted. The tours were smaller. Fewer visitors made the trip out to this forgotten town, and the silence between groups grew heavier. The air itself seemed to notice when there were no outsiders laughing and snapping pictures. It settled like a blanket over the empty buildings, thick and oppressive. And that was when the first real test came. It started on a Thursday evening, the sun already sliding behind the jagged mountains. The streets painted in that orange glow that makes everything look older, like time itself was fading. My group that day had canceled last minute, so it was just me, my lantern, and the sound of my boots crunching on the gravel. I told myself I was just checking the route, making sure nothing collapsed or shifted. But the truth was, I'd grown addicted to the stillness, to seeing how close I could get to breaking a rule without actually stepping over the line. I reached the end of Main Street and paused near the saloon, its swinging doors long gone but the frame still standing like a jaw missing its teeth. That's when I heard it, a knock, faint but clear. 3 sharp raps against wood. I froze because the notebook was specific. If you hear knocking on a door after dusk, do not answer, do not acknowledge, do not linger. And yet there it was, the sound echoing again, this time louder, insistent, like someone inside was demanding to be let out. My lantern quivered in my grip, the flame bending with my breath. And before I could think, I found myself stepping closer, drawn by curiosity, by the absurd idea that maybe it was just the wind, just loose boards. The knocking stopped the moment I touched the saloon's threshold. Silence swallowing the street, and in that silence I felt watched, not by one pair of eyes, but dozens, maybe hundreds. Pressing against me from every dark window, every broken door, I backed away, heart thundering, telling myself to leave, to go back to my cabin. But then came the mistake. The one thing the notebook never prepared me for, a voice. It was a child's voice, soft, muffled, calling from inside. "Mister."
Can you open the door?
I'm lost. The words scraped at something primal in me, an instinct to help, to protect. But it also struck ice into my spine, because no children lived here, no families. No staff would risk a prank that cruel. And still the voice came again, closer this time, like the speaker pressed their lips against the wood. "Please, it's dark, I'm cold." My throat dried, my hand hovering inches from the frame. The rule screaming in my head, "Do not answer, do not acknowledge." And yet I almost did, almost whispered back, until I caught sight of the lantern flame, twisting violently though the air was still. Bending toward the door as if drawn, I stumbled back, clutching the notebook like a talisman. And then the knocking exploded, a furious pounding that rattled the whole saloon. Dust raining from the beams, the voice twisting from plea to something deeper, harsher, layered. "Let me in." I turned and ran, boots striking sparks on the gravel, the pounding echoing behind me, following me down the street until I reached the church steps, where it cut off in an instant, the silence slamming down so hard it rang in my ears. I bent double, gasping, the notebook pressed against my chest like a shield. And in that moment I knew the rules weren't warnings, they were promises. And I had nearly broken one. I barely slept that night. Every creak of the cabin floorboards jolted me awake. Every shadow felt alive. I kept the lantern burning until dawn, whispering the rules over and over like prayers, my hands trembling so bad I could barely hold the book. And when morning came, I thought maybe it would fade, maybe I had exaggerated. But the doorframe to the saloon told another story. Deep indentations carved into the wood. Not scratches, not weathering, but handprints, dozens of them, small, large, pressed deep as if burned into the grain, as if everything that pounded the night before had left its mark. I showed no one, not the manager, not the other guides. Some part of me knew speaking it aloud gave it power, and worse, I feared they already knew. That they had all heard their own knocks once, all nearly answered, and had chosen silence because admitting it out loud made it real. But the town didn't let me breathe. It pushed further. The next night brought another group. 5 college kids with cameras and too much energy. They treated everything like a joke, shouting into buildings, daring each other to step over thresholds. I tried to keep them on track. reminding them the structures were unstable. But their laughter grated, their disbelief gnawed at me, and I realized too late the danger of people who didn't respect boundaries, who thought rules were optional. As we passed the row of windows, I kept my eyes down, refusing to look, but one of them noticed, a tall guy with a smirk. He caught the movement, called out, "Hey, are we not supposed to look in there?" I froze, praying he'd drop it, but he didn't. He pressed his face to the glass of the leaning house, cupping his hands around his eyes, and before I could drag him away, he stiffened, breath fogging the pain, his smirk vanishing, replaced by wide eyes. He whispered something I couldn't catch, then stumbled back, pale as bone. His friends laughed, thinking it was an act, but I saw his hands trembling, his camera clattering to the ground, lens shattering. I rushed them along, cutting the tour short, practically dragging them to the edge of town, and when we reached the parking lot, he bolted for the car, refusing to speak, refusing to look back, the others still joking until they saw his silence, his refusal to meet their eyes. Then the laughter died, replaced by unease. They left without another word, and I knew another line had been crossed. That night I stayed awake again, lantern lit, notebook open, but sleep clawed at me, dragging me under in fits and starts. And sometime after midnight I woke to the faintest sound, a creak, not from my cabin, but from outside. I rose, heart pounding, and peered through the shutter and froze, because in the middle of the street, directly under the broken lamppost, stood the college kid, the same one who had looked into the window, his posture rigid, his face too far to see clearly but unmistakable. He stood in that dead silence for what felt like hours, not moving, not calling out, just staring at my cabin, and when I blinked just once, he was gone, replaced by nothing but the long stretch of gravel and shadow. I didn't sleep again. Not that night, not the next. I knew the climax had arrived. The point where the rules weren't just suggestions but lifelines, fragile and absolute. And I was dangling by a thread above something vast and hungry, something that wanted me to slip, to break the silence, to wave back, to open a door, to give it the smallest crack to crawl through. The notebook grew heavier in my hands, each word etched in fire across my mind, and I realized I was no longer guiding tourists. No longer protecting them, I was protecting myself, trapped in a town that was watching, waiting, pressing against the edges of those 9 rules, testing them, testing me. And sooner or later I was going to fail. The days blurred after that night. Sleep came in fragments, the notebook never left my side. My lantern burned longer and the air around the town grew heavier, as if the soil itself wanted me to falter. But what really marked the beginning of the ordeal was Saturday night, when a private group arrived. A family of 4, parents and 2 teenagers, all eager smiles and cameras. They had driven 6 hours just for this tour, and their enthusiasm was a knife in my chest because I already knew the town was restless. I could feel it in the way the dust didn't settle, the way the shadows didn't stretch right across the road, but I couldn't cancel. Not without raising questions, so I led them in, rehearsing the rules under my breath with each step. At first it went smoothly. The kids cracked jokes. The parents asked history questions. I gave the practiced answers. Dates, mining details, names long dead, and for a while it almost felt normal, like the town was content to let me pretend. But as the sun dipped behind the jagged hills, I knew we had crossed a line. The air dropped colder. The lantern flame bent unnaturally and the silence thickened. And that was when I saw it, the first test of the night. One of the kids lagged behind near the sheriff's office, and before I could call him, he pointed, whispering that someone was waving from the upstairs window. I nearly dropped the lantern, my throat locking because the rule screamed in my head. Never wave back, never even acknowledge. I hurried to him, gripping his shoulder too hard. Pulling him away, his parents laughed, asking what spooked me, but I just muttered something about unstable structures, ushering them down the street. And all the while, that window burned into the edge of my vision, a pale figure still waving slowly, rhythmically, patient as stone, but the town didn't stop, it escalated. The deeper we went, the more the rules bled into one another. Near the church, the younger daughter skipped ahead, giggling until she froze at the base of the steps. Tilting her head, I rushed forward and saw her eyes fixed on the doorway, the warped wooden planks breathing faintly in and out as if lungs pressed against them from within. Then came the knock, faint but distinct. 3 sharp raps like the ones that had nearly undone me days before. The girl whispered, "Is someone inside?" Her hand already lifting, and I nearly shouted, grabbing her wrist, dragging her back, forcing my voice calm. "No, just the wood settling." Her parents frowned but didn't push, and I herded them onward, sweat soaking my shirt under the desert chill. By the time we reached the saloon, the father wanted a photo, insisting it was iconic, the swinging door frame still standing. And before I could protest, he lined up his family, smiling wide, raising his phone. And that was when the lantern flame sputtered violently, almost extinguished, the gravel crunching behind me, though no one was there. I spun and saw nothing but the empty street, yet the sound persisted, footsteps pacing slow, deliberate, circling us like a predator. The father lowered his phone, confusion flickering. "Is someone else here?" he asked. But my tongue felt glued, my lungs seizing as the footsteps stopped directly behind me. Close enough I swore I felt breath on my neck. I clutched the notebook tighter, whispering the rules. And after what felt like an eternity, the sound receded, fading into silence again. The family uneasy now, their smiles brittle, their movements quick. I cut the tour short, ushering them out under the excuse of an oncoming storm, their relief palpable. And when they finally drove off into the desert night, I sagged against the parking sign, my knees shaking, my lantern almost burnt through. But the ordeal wasn't finished, not by a long stretch, because the town had tasted my fear and it wanted more. That night I sat in my cabin, notebook open, lanterns lit in every corner, my nerves raw. And still I nearly succumbed. Around 2 a.m, the shutters rattled, though the air outside was still. Then came the tapping, slow, deliberate, like fingers drumming along the wall. Circling the cabin, I sat frozen, notebook clutched, whispering the rules until the sound reached the door. And that's when I heard it. The child's voice again, but warped, broken, as if spoken underwater. "Please, open. It's cold." My chest clenched, sweat pouring, the urge to answer almost irresistible. I bit my tongue until it bled just to ground myself, forcing the words, "Do not answer, do not acknowledge," over and over until the voice twisted, deepened, cracking into a guttural growl that shook the walls. "Let me in!" I screamed without meaning to, slamming my hands over my ears. And just like that, the sound stopped. Silence slamming down like a guillotine, leaving me trembling, teeth chattering, unable to move until dawn painted the windows gray. The next day I considered quitting, packing up, leaving the paycheck behind, but some sick pull anchored me here. The rules weren't just commands anymore. They were chains binding me to this place. And I realized leaving might not even help, because what if the town followed? What if the things waiting behind those doors and windows decided I belonged to them now? The thought lodged deep in my brain and I couldn't shake it. So I forced myself to keep going, to follow the motions, to guide more tours, each one a tightrope walk above an abyss. One evening, I led a small group of 3 men. Quiet types, no jokes, they listened intently, and for a while I thought maybe it would be uneventful. But as we passed the blacksmith shop, one of them froze, pointing to the doorway, whispering, "Did you hear that?" I hadn't, but the moment he said it, I did. A metallic scraping, rhythmic like a hammer striking an anvil. Echoing faintly, though the forge was long cold, my stomach dropped, the rule surfacing. "If you hear the smith's hammer, leave immediately. Do not look inside," I urged them on, my voice cracking. But one man hesitated, leaning toward the dark threshold, and before I could stop him, he whispered, "Hello?" The hammering stopped, silence thick, then something scraped closer, slow dragging metal, and I yanked his arm hard, nearly dislocating his shoulder, dragging him back down the road, his friends stumbling after us, confused and frightened. And as we rounded the corner, the sound erupted behind us, a deafening clang like iron on stone rattling the windows, chasing us until we reached the churchyard, where it cut off in an instant, leaving us gasping, pale, the men refusing to speak another word, leaving town without even saying goodbye. That night I lay awake, the rules etched behind my eyelids, my body hollowed by exhaustion, and still the town pressed. Shadows lengthened, the lanterns bent, voices whispered just at the edge of hearing, testing every seam of my sanity. I understood now that the ordeal wasn't one event. It was sustained pressure, a siege, the town probing for weakness, waiting for me to slip, to acknowledge, to wave, to open, to listen. And I wasn't sure how long I could resist, my willpower thinning, my body breaking. And yet some stubborn part of me clung to the notebook, to the fragile belief that as long as I followed the rules, however insane, I could survive. But the town had other plans, and I could feel the final test drawing closer. Heavy as storm clouds over the desert, inevitable and merciless. The town never forgave hesitation. I had learned that in fragments over sleepless nights, but by the 4th week it stopped playing with small cuts and pressed down with its full weight, testing every rule in the notebook until I was cornered, gasping. And the breaking point came on a night when the desert sky bled red with a dust storm on the horizon, the kind that makes the stars vanish and leaves only the dark outline of the hills. I should have canceled, every instinct screamed it. But the manager sent a message insisting a tour was booked, a corporate group that had prepaid, and so I put on the lantern strap, stuffed the notebook under my arm, and walked out to meet them. They were 7 in total, dressed too neatly for the desert, suits and polished shoes that picked up dust with every step. Their voices sharp, confident, dismissive. They cracked jokes at the ruins, compared the boarded buildings to movie sets. And I knew instantly they didn't believe. Not in the rules, not in me, not in anything but their own arrogance, and that made them dangerous. Because disbelief was what the town fed on. Disbelief invited it closer. Disbelief pulled the shadows to the surface. I led them down Main Street, my voice mechanical, rattling off the practiced history while my eyes scanned every window, every doorway, praying none of them noticed how my grip whitened on the lantern handle. But one did. A tall man with slicked hair who kept smirking at me. He leaned close enough for his breath to brush my ear and whispered, "You really buy into this ghost crap?" I didn't answer. Rule number 1 in a different form. Do not engage, do not feed it. But he laughed and raised his hand, waving at the leaning house, and before I could stop him, before I could grab his arm, something waved back. The entire group went silent, 7 pairs of polished shoes scuffing against the gravel as they froze, staring up at the warped window where a pale figure swayed, waving slowly, patiently, its head tilted too far to the side, and the tall man's smirk melted, his hand dropping, his lips parting with a strangled breath. But the others started laughing, nervous, too loud. One pulling out a phone to film, and I felt my stomach plunge because acknowledgement spread like disease. One wave begetting another, one glance inviting another, and the rule was already cracked. I shouted at them to move, my voice raw, and to my surprise they obeyed, hurrying down the street, laughter faltering, but the damage was done. The windows along the row seemed alive now, pale hands pressing against glass, knocking faintly, voices rising in whispers that braided into a hum, calling, beckoning. We reached the saloon and the air shifted, colder, denser, my lantern flame bending sideways though there was no wind, and the knocking started. Not from one door, but from every door along the street, syncopated, furious, demanding, the wood groaning as if ready to split. One of the women in heels screamed, clutching her ears, shouting that it was too loud, and then the voice rose above it all. A child's voice, but warped, layered, echoing from every direction, "Please, open the door." And I nearly buckled because I knew it wasn't one door anymore, it was all of them. Every boarded entrance, every rotten plank, begging in unison, pounding in rhythm like a heartbeat. I forced them forward, shouting orders, my throat burning, dragging the group like cattle through the noise. But the tall man resisted, digging his shoes into the dirt, muttering that he had to see, that maybe it was just a prank. His eyes glassy as if something unseen pulled him toward the saloon. And when I yanked his arm, he shoved me hard, my lantern slipping, flame sputtering, nearly going out. And in that instant, I swore I saw dozens of shapes pressing against the saloon's doorway, faces overlapping, hands clawing to get through, all whispering at once, "Let us in." I don't remember grabbing the lantern, only the burn as the hot metal seared my palm. But I lifted it high, forcing light outward. The shapes retreating just enough, the pounding stuttering, the group stumbling forward again. Panic now replacing disbelief. Their laughter long gone, and we ran, truly ran, down the length of Main Street, the noise chasing us like a storm, every window rattling, every building straining against its nails. And when we reached the churchyard, I screamed for them to stop, to stay within the path of the lantern because the ground itself was shifting, shadows spilling across the gravel like liquid. That was when the hammering began, the metallic clang from the blacksmith shop, loud enough to crack the night, each strike shaking the ground, and the rule rose sharp in my mind. If you hear the hammer, leave immediately, do not look inside. But one of the suited men turned his head anyway, eyes wide, muttering, "There's someone in there," and his voice broke because what he saw wasn't someone. It was a figure bent over the anvil, sparks flying through no fire burned, its arms moving too fast, too jagged, each swing tearing gouges into the stone. And then it stopped, its head snapping up, eyes like empty furnaces locking on him, and the man collapsed, screaming, clawing at his own face as if trying to tear something off, blood slicking his fingers. The group lost it, panic-full, scattering, ignoring my shouts, breaking the one rule that underpinned all the others: do not separate. I chased after them, lantern bouncing, breath ragged, and the town closed in. The pounding doors, the waving figures, the hammer's metallic roar, voices calling names that weren't theirs. Every rule unraveling at once, a symphony of violations. And I knew this was the ordeal, the second climax, the point where survival hung by a thread. I caught 2 of them near the general store, dragging them back together, shouting to stay in the lantern's glow. But the others vanished into alleys, their footsteps swallowed by silence. And in that silence I heard new sounds, a clock striking 3:33, though no clock tower stood here. Each chime reverberating through my bones, pulling my vision sideways, blurring the line between buildings and sky, between earth and air, and for a moment I thought I was falling, pulled into something vast and endless. I clutched the notebook, forcing my eyes down, forcing my voice to recite the rules, louder and louder until the chimes faded, until the lantern steadied, and when I looked up, the town was still again. The pounding ceased, the hammer silent, the voices gone, leaving only the ragged breaths of the 2 men clinging to me. Their faces pale, their eyes haunted, and I realized we had survived, but only barely. And the others, the ones who had scattered, would not be seen again, not as they were. I marched the survivors out, each step a war against the urge to run, my back crawling with the certainty that figures still watched from the shadows, waiting, calculating, patient. When we finally reached the parking lot, the men bolted, driving into the desert night without a word, without a glance, leaving me alone, the lantern nearly spent, the notebook heavy in my trembling hands. And I knew the town had shown me its teeth, had dragged me into its heart. And next time it would not settle for almost. That night in the cabin I couldn't move, couldn't speak, only sat with the lantern dimming, the notebook open on my knees, pages fluttering though there was no wind. And in the silence came a final sound, faint but sharp, a knock, not on the door, not on the walls, but from inside the notebook itself. 3 steady raps against the paper, and I closed my eyes, whispering the rules until my throat cracked, because I understood then the rules weren't just for the town. They were for me, binding me, reshaping me, and sooner or later the book itself would demand payment. The next evening I should have run, taken the road west until the desert swallowed the horizon, but something in the notebook pulled me back, a weight more binding than chains, each rule now feeling less like advice and more like commandments etched into me. And when I woke to the sound of footsteps circling the cabin at precisely 3:33 a.m., I knew the town was no longer waiting for tours or careless visitors. It had chosen me, and the ordeal was no longer optional. It was the price for survival. I lit the lantern, though its flame seemed thinner, weaker. The glass fogged as if something breathed on it from inside. And when I stepped outside, the desert had changed. The air thicker, heavy with the scent of iron and rot. The horizon smeared like wet paint. Buildings where none should be. The ghost town stretching outward, replicating itself, block after block bleeding into the sand. I followed the path because there was no choice. The gravel crunching beneath my boots, though sometimes it wasn't gravel, but something softer, like bone dust, and each building I passed bore signs of the rules unraveling. Doors wide open though none should be. Windows filled with faces pressed against the glass, though no laughter came. Only silence, suffocating and endless. I kept muttering the rules under my breath, clinging to them like rope, but the notebook grew heavier, pages flicking as if unseen hands turned them. And when I glanced down, I saw new sentences forming, fresh ink seeping through the paper, words that hadn't been there before. The 9th rule is the last. When they call your name, do not answer. My blood froze because they hadn't called yet, but they would. Main Street was alive, not with tourists, not with the living, but with processions of figures walking in silence, some half-formed, faces blurred like melted wax, others crisp and sharp, eyes burning with hunger, and they carried objects I recognized from past nights. A hammer, a cracked lantern, a child's doll with no eyes, each one a piece of the town's twisted heartbeat. I pressed myself to the side, clutching the lantern, praying not to be noticed, but as they passed, their heads turned in perfect unison, every face tilting toward me, every mouth opening soundlessly, and though no word escaped, I felt it vibrating in my skull, the shape of my own name forming on their lips. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping the lantern, whispering the 9th rule, over and over, do not answer, and the procession moved on, dissolving into the mist that now clung to the churchyard, and I realized the ordeal wasn't just about endurance. It was about silence, restraint, surviving the endless pull of recognition. I kept moving, drawn to the church though every fiber of me resisted. Its doors now wide open, blacker than night. The bell tower leaning though no bell remained, and from within came a sound like breathing. Slow, cavernous, rattling through the beams. Inside the pews were filled, not with tourists or townsfolk, but with shadows sculpted into human shapes, each one sitting upright, heads bowed, hands folded as if in prayer. And when I entered, every head lifted in unison. Eyes blank but fixed on me, mouths opening to speak. My name spilled from them, hundreds of voices in perfect chorus dragging through the air like chains. Alex, Alex. I clenched my jaw until my teeth ached, fists tight, repeating the 9th rule in my skull like a mantra, refusing to let the sound out, but the temptation gnawed, because it wasn't just my name. It was my father's voice in the choir, my mother's, my brother's, each syllable dripping with memory, and I wanted to scream, to shout back, to collapse into the comfort of answering. But I bit my tongue until blood filled my mouth, until the urge broke into pain, and I staggered forward down the aisle. At the altar stood the notebook, larger now, impossibly large, a tome bound in something that wasn't leather, its cover breathing, swelling, exhaling dust into the air. And as I approached, the voices crescendoed, screaming my name, shaking the rafters, the pews trembling as if the shadows would burst free, and the lantern flame guttered, nearly dying. I slammed the notebook I carried onto the altar beside the larger one, the impact sending sparks through the air, and in that moment both books aligned, pages fluttering wildly, rules crossing each other, lines rewriting, and new sentences scarring themselves into the parchment. My eyes locked onto one final line, pulsing like a wound. To leave, you must break a rule. The voices fell silent, the air collapsing into stillness, the weight of the demand sinking into me, because every instinct, every fragment of survival screamed to obey the rules. But the town wanted a violation, a sacrifice, proof that I belonged to it enough to betray myself. My hands shook, lantern dimming, notebook throbbing, and I realized there was no trick, no hidden path. I would have to choose which rule to break, and the choice itself would mark me forever. The silence broke with a sound like shattering glass as one of the shadowed figures rose from the pews, its form solidifying with each step, face resolving into a man I knew, the tall tourist who had waved, his suit still dusted, his eyes empty pits, his mouth twisting as he spoke in that child's voice from before. Break it, or stay. My stomach churned as I backed away, the lantern now spitting sparks, my breath ragged, and every figure in the pews began to rise. Dozens, hundreds, all waiting, all staring, their mouths shaping my name again, lips cracking, voices ready to erupt. And I knew if they spoke again, I might not resist this time. I lifted the lantern high, flame flaring one last time, and whispered through clenched teeth, "Then I choose." My decision came like a blade, cutting clean, my heart hammering as I bent toward the altar, eyes fixed on one line in the rules that had haunted me most. Never go near the church after midnight. I was inside, I was here, and I had already broken it, but the act wasn't enough. I had to own it, to claim it. I slammed my palm against the pulsing notebook, shouting into the silence, "I break the rule." And the moment the words left my mouth, the town screamed back, not with anger but with ecstasy. A roar of voices so loud it split the rafters, the shadows collapsing inward, the pews splintering, the altar exploding into shards, and the lantern burst into white fire that consumed everything, the flame swallowing the air, the voices, the notebook itself. When the light died, I was outside, on the edge of the desert, the ghost town behind me, smaller, thinner, as if shrinking back into itself, buildings folding, windows sealing, streets dissolving into sand, and in my hand the notebook lay open, blank. Every rule erased except one. Remember. My knees gave out, my body shaking, the desert night suddenly cold and vast. The ordeal over but not gone, because I understood the rules were never meant to save me forever, only to buy time, and now the town had rewritten me, carved its claim into my marrow, and I carried it wherever I went. The desert was quiet, too quiet, and for the first time since stepping into the cursed ghost town, I felt something close to stillness. Though it was a fragile kind of peace, the sort you don't trust because you know it can collapse with the faintest sound. I sat on the cold sand, chest heaving, notebook still clutched in my trembling hands, its pages blank save for that one word etched like a scar. Remember. The lantern was gone, burned away in the white fire, and without it the stars looked sharper, crueler, scattered like knives across the sky, and I realized how far I had wandered. The desert stretching endless in every direction. No clear road, no lights, only silence. My body begged me to rest, to collapse fully, and I gave in, lowering myself until my back pressed against the dry earth. But even lying there, I couldn't shake the phantom weight of the rules, my mind cycling through them as if afraid they would return at any second. For a while I simply listened, to the wind whispering across the dunes, to the rasp of my own breath, and the absence of voices felt wrong, almost painful, as if the quiet itself was mocking me. I expected every second to hear my name carried on the wind, to feel eyes on me, but none came, and in that void my thoughts grew louder, replaying everything I had seen inside the church, the shadows in the pews, the chorus of my family's voices, the unbearable choice to break the rule. I wondered if I had truly survived, or if survival here was just another trick, another layer of the ordeal, and that thought coiled in me like a snake, making it impossible to fully breathe. I pushed myself up eventually, legs unsteady, and began walking. No direction in mind, just forward, because stopping felt dangerous, like an invitation, though the desert was indistinguishable in every direction, each dune a twin of the last. Hours blurred. The moon slid lower, and I caught myself muttering fragments of the rules even though the notebook told me they were gone, my tongue clinging to old anchors as if to keep me tethered. And each time I whispered them, I half expected the air to thicken, the town to bloom again on the horizon. But it didn't. And by the time the first hint of dawn bled into the sky, I saw something else, lights faint, far off, glowing orange against the fading stars. My heart lurched with hope, though caution gnawed at me, because I knew too well that not all lights were real, not all shelters safe, yet exhaustion pulled me toward them like gravity, and soon the outline of a small roadside diner appeared, its neon sign sputtering, promising coffee, warmth, normalcy. The smell of grease and burnt toast reached me even before I touched the door, and that alone almost broke me, my knees weak with hunger and the desperate yearning for something human. Inside it was nearly empty. Just a lone waitress behind the counter wiping a mug with tired eyes, and a trucker slumped in a booth sipping black coffee. Both glanced at me but said nothing, which felt almost merciful. I slid onto a stool, every muscle screaming, and when the waitress asked simply, "You want something hot?" I nodded, my voice too broken to reply. The coffee came steaming, bitter and real, the eggs greasy but grounding. And as I ate, I felt the phantom weight of the town retreat a little, though never fully, always there at the edges. The lull wasn't just in the quiet. It was in the illusion of safety, in the ordinary clatter of plates, the soft hum of a radio playing country songs, the sunlight beginning to cut through the blinds. I almost convinced myself I had made it back, that the nightmare had folded behind me, and yet my fingers kept brushing the notebook, its single-word reminder pulsing faintly beneath the cover, anchoring me in the truth that the ordeal was not done, only paused. I caught the trucker staring once, his eyes not unfriendly but oddly blank, lingering too long, and when I looked back he dropped his gaze to his coffee, and I told myself it was nothing, but unease curled anyway, that same sense of being watched, tested. When I finally stepped outside, the sun fully risen, the diner shrinking behind me, I should have felt relief, yet the world still seemed fragile, like a painting stretched too thin, colors off in small ways, the air slightly heavier than it should be. Each step forward carried me farther from the ghost town, but not free of it, because it was in me now, carried like a splinter under the skin, and I knew the lull could not last. It was the breath before the final plunge, the stillness before the storm returned. So I walked, notebook under my arm, breath steadying, waiting for the moment it would all fracture again. And somewhere deep in the silence, almost inaudible, I thought I heard it, the faintest echo of my name, carried low on the wind, testing the edges of my restraint, reminding me that the town was patient, and that surviving it once didn't mean I had escaped, only that I had been allowed a moment to breathe before the end. The road out of the desert stretched endless, a ribbon of cracked asphalt disappearing into the horizon, and I walked it with the sun burning my back. The notebook clutched tight, though its pages remained stubbornly blank except for that one word that seemed to pulse in rhythm with my heartbeat. Remember. Each mile I put between myself and the ghost town should have brought relief, yet the air never felt lighter. And the silence that followed me was not the silence of peace, but of something watching, waiting, just beyond sight. I told myself that all I had to do was keep moving. Find the city lights, hear the noise of traffic, and maybe then the weight would lift. But even as I thought it, doubt gnawed at me. Because part of me already knew the town was no longer a place on a map. It was inside me now, stitched into memory, and no distance could erase it. By noon, a battered pickup truck slowed beside me, dust kicking up from its tires, and the driver, a man with a weathered face and mirrored sunglasses, leaned out and asked if I needed a lift. My throat was raw, my body aching, so I nodded, sliding into the passenger seat with the notebook still under my arm. The man said little as the truck rumbled forward, country music crackling through the radio. And for a moment I allowed myself to believe I was safe, just another traveler in the desert. But then I caught his reflection in the mirror, his lips moving though no words came, shaping something silently. And it took me a breath too long to realize what it was. My name. He was mouthing it again and again, eyes never leaving the road, his expression otherwise unchanged. My stomach turned ice and I pressed back into the seat, clutching the notebook, whispering the 9th rule in my head: do not answer, do not answer. The man never turned, never spoke aloud, and after what felt like an eternity, he simply blinked, tapped the steering wheel and said, "Where you headed?" As if nothing had happened. I lied, told him the name of a city miles away, and when he finally dropped me near a gas station on the outskirts, I stumbled out shaking, unsure if he had been real at all or just another test. Another echo from the town reaching into the world beyond. The gas station was bright, humming with fluorescent lights, shelves lined with chips and soda, the kind of ordinary setting I had craved. But even here the world felt off. The hum of the lights pitched slightly wrong, the cashier's eyes lingering a moment too long, his smile too fixed. I bought water, chips, anything to occupy my hands, but the unease never left. And when I stepped outside again, I swore I heard the faint scrape of footsteps behind me. Though no one was there, it struck me then with brutal clarity. The town had not let me go. The ordeal in the church had been the center, the breaking of the rule the climax. But the resolution was not escape, it was acceptance. Learning to live with the infection of memory, to survive knowing the town would always stalk me, sometimes close, sometimes far, but never gone. That word in the notebook was not advice but a command. Remember. Forgetting would mean losing myself, answering when they called, letting the pull drag me back. Survival now was vigilance. Days blurred as I made my way east, buses and hitched rides carrying me farther from the desert. Yet the signs followed, a child humming my name under her breath as she passed on a sidewalk, a streetlight flickering in the pattern of the town's church bell, a shadow too long stretching behind me at noon. Each time I felt the temptation to break, to scream, to answer, but I clung to silence, to the memory of the rules even though they were gone, repeating them like prayer, each syllable a fragile shield. One night in a motel room, I opened the notebook again, desperate for clarity, and found a new line etched faintly on the last page. The town is patient. It does not need to chase, only to wait. My hands shook as I traced the words because I understood then that my ordeal had not ended in that church. It had only shifted. The rules were no longer external instructions, but part of me, and breaking one had tied me to the town forever. The final resolution was not about defeating it, but about enduring it, living with the knowledge that I carried its mark, that every mirror, every whisper of my name, every flicker of silence might be its hand reaching. I sat there for hours staring at that line, until the neon from the motel sign bled through the curtains and I realized I had a choice. Collapse into paranoia, or adapt, use the rules not as a cage but as a compass. I would not answer when called. I would not step back into the ghost town no matter what temptation clawed at me. I would not forget no matter how much I wished to. Because remembering was the only weapon I had left, the only thing that might keep the spirits at bay. When morning came, I checked out, the clerk giving me that same too long stare, and as I stepped into the street, the sun felt heavier. The day stretched, but I kept walking, notebook under my arm, rules echoing silently in my head. The ordeal had scarred me, bent me, but it had not broken me. And maybe that was the resolution the town had demanded, that I carry its weight without giving in, that I prove I could live in the shadow of its rules without collapsing. The desert was behind me now, the ghost town fading like a nightmare, but the silence never left. It followed in the beat of my steps, in the shadows at the corner of my vision, in the breathless lull before sleep. And though I hated it, Though I longed to bury the notebook, I knew I never would because forgetting was death, and remembering was survival. So I walked on into the noise of the living world, carrying the silence of the dead like a second skin, my name forever echoing in the dark, waiting for me to slip, to answer, and knowing I never would. The notebook grew heavier as the days went on, not in weight but in presence, a constant pull at the edge of my awareness, like gravity bending around it, and I began to realize that carrying it was not just survival but an invitation, a tether connecting me to the town no matter how far I wandered. By the third week, the rules were etched so deeply into my mind that I no longer needed to read them, though the pages remained blank except for that one word, remember. Yet sometimes when the light hit just right, faint impressions bled through the paper, as if the words were still there beneath the surface, waiting to surface again. I thought I could endure it, that this was the resolution, living as a man marked but not consumed. But then came the first dream. In it I stood once more on Main Street, the buildings whole, lanterns glowing, the air buzzing with the quiet of expectation. And though I knew it was not real, the smell of dust and iron was too sharp, the crunch of gravel too solid, and when the shadows turned toward me and spoke my name in perfect chorus, I woke screaming, blood on my tongue from biting it in my sleep. That night was the first but not the last. Each dream dragged me deeper, each one eroding the line between memory and reality. And I understood then that the town wasn't finished with me. It never intended to let me walk away unscathed. The climax began on a Thursday night when I was staying in a rundown boarding house outside Flagstaff. I had locked the door, pulled the curtains tight, yet at exactly 3:33 a.m., the scratching began. At first it was faint, like branches against glass, but it grew sharper, deliberate, until I sat upright in bed, pulse thundering, eyes fixed on the window. The curtains stirred though the window was closed, and then I heard it. My name whispered in that same chorus of voices, thin but unmistakable, threading through the wood and glass. Alex, Alex. I clamped my hands over my ears, repeating the 9th rule in my head. But this time something shifted, because when I glanced at the notebook on the nightstand, the cover was open though I had closed it, and new ink scarred the page. The rules cannot protect you forever. The scratching grew violent, the window rattling as if something pressed against it from outside, and though I told myself not to look, I couldn't stop. The pull irresistible, and when I peeled back the curtain, the ghost town stared back. Not the street outside, not the boarding house parking lot, but Main Street itself, stretching endless, lanterns burning, shadows filling the road. The town had come to me. My knees buckled, but the pull was too strong, and in the blink of an eye, I wasn't in the boarding house anymore. I was standing in the middle of Main Street, the notebook still clutched in my hand, the voices surrounding me in every direction. This was no dream, no fevered memory. The air was too thick, the ground too solid, the smell of burning lantern oil acrid in my nostrils. The figures were clearer now, less shadow and more flesh, though their faces remained blurred and distinct except for their mouths, which moved in unison, forming my name again and again. I stumbled backward, but the town closed around me, the buildings bending inward like a trap, and the notebook throbbed in my grip, its pages flipping violently until it settled on a fresh line of ink. Answer them. My heart stopped, because the rule I had clung to most, the one that had saved me, was now inverted, and the town demanded that I obey. The church bell tolled, though the tower was empty, a deep resonant sound that rattled the bones in my chest, and the shadows surged closer, their mouths stretching wider, voices louder, until my own name was no longer just sound but force, shaking the ground, pressing against my skull. I dropped to my knees, clutching the notebook, torn between silence and surrender, knowing that either choice might kill me, but also knowing I couldn't hold out forever. Then I remembered the line etched during the ordeal in the church. To leave, you must break a rule. I had done it once, stepping into the church past midnight, claiming the violation, but now the town demanded more. Survival meant choosing again, and I realized with sick clarity that the rules were not commandments at all. They were levers, each one a thread in a web the town controlled, and breaking them was not failure but sacrifice. So I stood, body trembling, voice raw, and whispered, "Then hear me." The effect was instant. The voices fell silent, the shadows freezing mid-step, every mouth closing, every eye snapping toward me. My name no longer hung in the air. Instead, there was expectation, hunger, silence so deep it rang. I lifted the notebook high, pages fluttering, and spoke again, louder this time. You wanted me to answer. I answer now. The town convulsed. Buildings warped, streets cracked, lanterns shattered, and the shadows collapsed inward, surging toward me as if to consume me whole. The notebook burst into flame, white fire licking up my arms, and I screamed, not in fear but defiance, my name tearing from my throat, echoing louder than the chorus. I am Alex. The fire spread, devouring everything, the town shrieking in response. 1,000 voices screaming not with triumph but with rage, the air splitting, the ground opening. For a heartbeat I thought I had doomed myself, that the town would swallow me, bind me forever, but then the fire surged outward, consuming the shadows, the buildings, the very fabric of the ghost town. The voices fractured, splintering into chaos, no longer unified. And I understood then that answering had broken their control, shattered the chorus into noise. The town had thrived on silence, on restraint, on rules. But by answering, by naming myself, I had given it what it demanded and destroyed its unity. The fire consumed everything, and when it faded, I stood alone in the desert once more. The notebook nothing but ash in my hand. The horizon vast and empty, the silence profound. My chest heaved, sweat slick on my skin. But I was still here, alive, and the town was gone. Or at least gone for now. The climax had burned me hollow, left me raw, but also left me free, at least in part. The rules were gone, the notebook gone, but the memory remained, carved into me deeper than bone, and I knew the town could never be truly destroyed. It would rebuild, wait, seek another, maybe even call me again someday. But for the first time, I felt I had taken something from it too, a piece of defiance, a name spoken aloud against the chorus, proof that I was more than its rules, more than its silence. As dawn broke over the desert, I walked forward, ash trailing from my fingers, the horizon open, my name still echoing faintly in my ears, not as a threat but as a reminder, the only weapon I had left. The desert never looked so vast as it did that morning, stretching endless beneath the pale wash of dawn, and for the first time in weeks the horizon didn't feel like a trap. My steps were unsteady, each one dragging, but the weight I carried was different now. Not the pull of the notebook or the town, but the hollow ache of having survived something that was never meant to be survived. The rules were gone, the chorus broken, and yet the echoes lingered. Faint whispers in the corners of my mind reminding me that silence itself could be a prison. I thought about the first time I read those rules, sitting at the old desk in the guide shack, my fingers trembling as I tried to make sense of them. Back then they had seemed absurd, like a bad joke, the kind of thing you'd tell new hires just to scare them. Do not whistle. Do not speak after sundown. Never ever answer when they call your name. But each rule had carved me into who I was now, a man who had tested every one of them, broken them, and survived not because I was brave, but because I learned that sometimes survival means refusing to play the game by its terms. That was the truth the town had hidden beneath its lanterns and shadows. The rules weren't for safety. They were for control. Each line was a leash, each silence a chain, and the ghosts fed on obedience. The moment I answered, the moment I said my own name, I gave them what they wanted, but also stole back what they had taken. That was why the town burned, why the chorus fractured. Sometimes defiance is the only prayer that works. When I finally reached the nearest road, a lone trucker slowed, gave me a ride without asking too many questions. I must have looked wild, clothes scorched, face hollow, eyes staring too far past the glass, but he didn't press. Some people can smell a story they don't want to hear. I thanked him quietly, clutched the seatbelt, and let the miles roll by. By the time we reached Phoenix, the sun was high, the world alive with noise and traffic and chatter, and I almost laughed at how strange it felt to be surrounded by people again, by voices that weren't my own name. But freedom doesn't erase scars. The nights are hardest. Sometimes when I close my eyes, I see Main Street waiting for me, lanterns flickering, doors half open as if daring me to walk back in. Other times I dream of the notebook, blank pages rustling, that single word glowing like an ember. Remember. And I do. I remember every shadow, every whisper, every moment I almost broke. And I know I'll carry it until the end of my days. Survival isn't about forgetting. It's about refusing to let the memory own you. If you're hearing this, if you've made it this far, maybe you're wondering why I told you any of it. Maybe you think it's just a story, something to keep you up at night, but nothing more. Or maybe you feel that itch at the back of your mind, that tug in your chest when I describe the lantern light or the sound of gravel crunching underfoot. If you do, then listen carefully. The town is still out there. It will call again. Maybe not to you, maybe not tonight, but someday it will reach for another drifter, another guide, another fool who thinks the rules are just stories. If that fool is you, then hear me. The rules can help you at first. They can keep you alive long enough to learn, but don't mistake them for salvation. They are not shields. They are shackles. And when the time comes, when the shadows press too close and the silence is unbearable, don't cling to them. Break them, speak, answer. Name yourself and do it loud enough to shatter the chorus. That's the only way I found to step back into the world. I am not telling you to be reckless. Obedience will buy you time, and sometimes time is all you need to figure out your next move. But know this, the town doesn't want your silence, not really. It wants your surrender. The difference is subtle until it's not. I almost learned too late. Don't make my mistake. Don't let them trick you into believing the rules are safety. They are just the first layer of the trap. I don't know if I'll ever be free. Maybe I only delayed the inevitable. Maybe one night the scratching will come again, and this time the desert won't let me go. But until that happens, I will keep speaking. Keep telling the story, keep naming myself. That's all any of us can do when the dark tries to strip us down to nothing. Refuse to be silent. Refuse to be erased. So if you ever find yourself in Arizona, and someone offers you a tour of a ghost town no one else seems to remember, think twice. If you find a notebook with blank pages and rules etched into your mind, think 3 times. And if you hear your name whispered in the dark, don't wait for me to tell you again. You already know what to do. My name is Alex. I was a tour guide in a ghost town that should not exist. I broke the rules. I survived. And now so can you.